Welcome to Possibilities with Monique de Maio. I am supercharged to have with me today Rachel Durkan. Yay! Hi, Rachel.
I'm Flavie dear. Thank you for having me.
You're absolutely welcome. So, to give you some context, and Rachel can talk a little bit about herself as well, but Rachel is our lead off as it relates to the number 4 secret in the book, Seven Secrets to Designing a Life You Love, a practical guide for women in leadership on job and career. I've always been impressed with Rachel's choices and how she's really created a life and a career for herself and a business that is thriving. And I think that it would be great for some of our listeners to unpack a little bit of Rachel's secrets, tips, tricks, and other things. So I'm going to turn it over to Rachel in a couple secs. Rachel, you are an inspiration to a lot of young women.
Oh, that's nice to hear.
Yeah, we met obviously years ago when you were working for Bergen County United Way, and you were a marketing manager there and doing your thing and ambitious and smart, and thought, well, I could do this on my own. So take us through that journey of I'm working for somebody else. I'm working for an association and then, or a not for profit, I should say. And then boom.
I know you were talking about how intentional I am, but at the time it was a little bit of an accident. So that turned into intention. So I was working for United Way. It's a wonderful, worthy organization. I found myself, I call it my quarter life crisis. I found myself after a couple of years there not feeling very challenged. And so, in a very flat, small organization, it's very difficult to see a growth path, to, share new ideas, be innovative, all that good stuff. So, this was actually right around, like, right after the 2008 recession. So, I was like, what's my next journey? Where am I going to go from here? I actually remember doing a couple job interviews. Nothing was really out there that excited me. And at United Way at the time, so to give you some context, I was in college when Facebook was like first came out. So like by the time I graduated college, remember Facebook was only available to college students, and then it transitioned over to like everybody. By the time it came out and transferred, like I hit that perfect timing where I had been an expert in Facebook using it in college and no one else had ever used it before. So suddenly this concept of like digital social media marketing came about, and they were like, you've used this. You are now our digital marketing manager. I'm like, okay. Like there's no training. There's no like, just I just happen to be able to log in and post a lot of stuff. So in doing that, crowdfunding and digital strategies that were all very new at the time, I found myself having to understand the world of web and understand how to edit a website, how a website integrates with the marketing strategy in the digital world. And I actually asked United Way, and I paid for part of it, and they paid for some of it, if I could go back to school for web and graphic design. And so at the time, I went back to school because I needed to understand like how everything integrated together, how code worked, how pixels worked, all that good stuff. And when I went back, I was like, I really enjoyed this. And so as a hobby, at nights and on the weekends, I started building websites for people. And I was very honest with them with what I was doing. But I remember I built my first website. I got the job on Craigslist. It was a 50-page website, and I built it for $500.
Oh my God, 50 pages?
Yeah, but I like between you and me, I had no idea what I was doing. Like I can handle this, and it took me a long time to figure it out. But I met the deadline, and I mean today that would be like $50,000, right, Monique? So yeah, I got a pretty good deal out of me. So I really enjoyed it, and so I would build sites for people at nights and on the weekends, and my hobby started making almost as much money as my quote unquote real job. Now I had a marketing background, so these small businesses would come to me and say, I'd say, well, who's your target audience? They'd say, everyone. But I'd say, well, what's your value proposition? I'm really good at customer service. And so a lot of help from a marketing standpoint. And so as I was building these websites, I was giving them marketing advice. And actually Paradigm started as purely a web development company and with free marketing advice. And then from there, I got intentional.
Isn't it always the way, though, if you talk to most entrepreneurs, they either created their businesses because of a need that they saw in the market and or their side hustle took off?
Yeah. I mean, I saw a need for sure. I think it was partly intentional and partly unintentional because I to me, a really good business coach once said to me, like, the perfect spot for like an entrepreneur is like when you can build your business from a solopreneur to an entrepreneur. Think of like a Venn diagram, and it's like what you're good at, what you enjoy, and what the company needs. And if you can be in the middle of that, great. So it's important to enjoy it, which I did. And there was a market for it.
Well, note context to those listening, Rachel and I did also collaborate early on when she wasn't giving free marketing advice. When she didn't want to give free marketing advice, right? And I was doing the strategy and the planning, and then you were doing the web development. And we had a couple clients that really loved having the two of us tag team on stuff. And how has the journey been? Now, between the time that you started your company, you were married, but you had no kids. Enter stage left. Now you have got, so give us this sense of like, you were a little bit of a workaholic. I can't relate to this at all, as you know. So give us that context for what happened after that.
I always tell people, knowing what I know now, what are we like 10, 12 years later, even more than that, I don't think I would ever start another business. Like, I mean, maybe with my knowledge I would, but if I knew what I would have to go through then, I probably wouldn't have done it. Because being a solopreneur or like having one or two employees it's if you're passionate about it, which I was, it's great because it fuels you, but it's also a little bit soul sucking, and it doesn't leave a lot of room for anything else in your life. I mean, I was married young with my husband now, but he had his own thing, I had my own thing. It was easy to work 75 hours a week, and nobody gave me a hard time about it. I remember with my son when he was born, the company was probably, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years old, maybe a little more than that, and I only took 6 weeks maternity leave. And like, and in that, I still worked, while I mean, between you and me and all these listeners, I literally remember being like on meetings. I mean, it wasn't the day of Zoom, but on virtual meetings with like my son on me and like, just like hiding him in the camera.
I remember that too.
Yeah. And you remember for me or for you?
Both. I remember you telling me that you were, and I remember me doing that you were also.
So, that was hard. That you kind of you have to reprioritize like your work-life balance and what you want to do and be. But that also, I think a lot of us, I have a lot of young managers who work for me now, and I think the hardest thing to go from the stage of expert, manager, leader, I think going from an expert to a manager is really hard for a lot of people. And when you add in the extra pressures of life and your wants, I think it forces you to become a good manager and not hold on to everything in like a micro way. And so I started embracing that, and I did it in every aspect of my life, from like nanny and cleaning lady to building a team. And it was around that time also I decided I need people. I'm the smartest person in the room at Paradigm, and that is not going to fly anymore. Like, there's too many things that I don't know. I've got a lot of strengths, but I also got a lot of weaknesses. And I started hiring people that were smarter than me. And that was also a big maturity jump, because I think a lot of people get intimidated by, especially like if you're the owner of a company, not being the smartest person in the room. I do not want to be the smartest person in the room anymore, unless it's with the client, because hopefully they're paying me to be smarter. But, when it comes to our team, I do not want to be the smartest person in the room. And you kind of have to start hiring people and contractors, employees, whatever, that are better than you at other things. So I always say I'm a jack of all trades and I'm an expert of none. So I need to hire a lot of experts that can start working together.
So that's a really good point that you make about the smartest person in the room, because I tell my children, if you're the smartest person in the room, get another room.
Mm-hmm. So true.
It doesn't serve you. It will not have you grow if you're the smartest person. If you're the answer person at all times for everything, you're not going anywhere.
Comfort is a dangerous thing. And sometimes we deserve comfort. And sometimes like after a couple months of growth, I'm like, all right, I just don't want to I need to let this go. But if you're too comfortable for too long, you are not growing. And that is very dangerous.
And when you say growing, you don't mean just growing from a financial perspective. You mean growing as a human, growing as a person, as a professional, and so on.
Yeah, always. Yeah.
I want to unpack what you said before about manager to leader or subject matter expert to manager. Because I think a lot of people, a lot of women who are going to be are listening to this podcast are sensing themselves. They're in companies. They're on the path, right? The path to the next job, the next promotion, the next whatever, and they may or may not see that path clearly because sometimes it's a little obtuse. And they may not understand what you meant or what we mean by creating that ecosystem of support around you in order to excel. What did you do systemically or from a process perspective at your company to have these young women understand that model?
What happens in a small business or any business is somebody becomes an expert. They become the perfect client account manager, the perfect strategist, whatever it might be. And then we say, oh, you can probably, instead of handling 7 accounts, let's give you 14 and 2 people under you. And now suddenly you're taking someone who's really good at their job and you're expecting them to manage others, and they have no idea how to manage. So you get these really overwhelmed, usually type A personalities that don't want to admit defeat, don't want to say they can't do it. Maybe they're perfectionists. I mean, I am too. And I mean that in the most complimentive way. But if you can't let go, you can't grow. And that is a big push. So there's a couple of things that I've learned. One, you've got to pull way back. So actually, my COO taught me this. Like whenever we have an employee who's struggling that we feel like is really good should be good at what they're doing, we pull way back because it just means, moving into overwhelmed phase doesn't allow anybody to grow, right? When we're in crisis mode and we're reactive, we're not being proactive, and it's very hard to become proactive. So pulling way back on their workload. I just had this today. I have a very capable person, and we just took a big chunk off their plate so that they can then get further, right? And then I'll give the chunk back when they're ready. So there's one. I think the other thing, and this is something that we're learning, is I always try to have this, we have what's called debrief. So a mistake happens. I'm a big believer, like, make mistakes. Even if and I don't want this to happen, but even if a mistake causes us to lose a client, if you learn from the mistake, it was a valid experience. It's when you don't learn from my mistakes that I start to get irritated, right? As anybody would. So we have this thing called debriefs after we lose a client, after something didn't go perfectly well, after, maybe it wasn't like a major issue, but there was a lot of hiccups and stress in the situation. We have debriefs. What went right? What went wrong? And I always say to them at the beginning of these are not about blame. These are about the only thing, even if you had a difficult client, even if you had a difficult situation, maybe COVID came out of the blue, there's something out of your control. The only thing you can control is what you can control. So what would you have done differently in hindsight? What would you change for next time so that you can control the situation within your ability? And those seem to go really well. However, what I've started to learn is that the only time you're developing and growing, which can happen when you're really busy, is when a mistake happens. Even if we're coming at it like, how do we learn? Not like you did this, is that people start to feel as though we're harping on mistakes as opposed to where the intention is to learn and grow. So I think it's really important, and we've instituted this, is to have a reactive strategy, a debrief, but also more importantly, a proactive lesson along the way, like every month or on a regular basis. Here's the expectations. Here's something new to learn. Here's a leadership training session. Here's a management strategy, planning group that we're going to do. Because then those lessons learned when the mistakes come can be referenced. So it's really important to be proactive with your training as well as everything else in your organization, because people don't always learn as well when they feel stressed, when they feel bad about themselves, when something went wrong, but they can learn when there's a clear head. So it's really important to balance. You should learn from your mistakes, but it's important to balance those two things. And so as we're building managers, we're trying to have a parallel, learn from your mistakes, but have a proactive approach to the process.
That's really cool. So that's a master class, you guys. So there's a proactive and there's reactive. Clearly, the reactive, you're mitigating the damage of the reaction because you're learning from it, expressing it, sharing it, and presumably that will be institutionalized as a not to do for future reference. The proactive side I really think is fantastic is you're bringing in-house learning to the team. So it's almost like you're creating your own tab or your own Vistage or your own whatever inside your organization. So every month they're learning a new skill or a new thought or a new practice or a new process or something.
And you know what? This kind of, yes. And as you're saying that, it made me think. I just had a chat about this today in a meeting. Is I mentioned expert, manager, leader, and so there's different. The expert is, you're good at the tactics. The manager is you're good at delegating, holding accountability, developing others, and the leader is about inspiring. Protecting, being a driving force. Actually, being good at one can sometimes make you bad at another. So, I had somebody today. She's actually a good leader and a good tactician, but could improve on management. And it's because, she's always protecting her team. It was my mistake. I own it. She always takes accountability, and that's great. That's something that you want in someone. But it also can be a detriment because if you don't hold accountability on anybody else, then they don't get to learn, right? So sometimes people have to be uncomfortable. Like by protecting them from all discomfort, you're not giving them the opportunity to learn anything.
Sort of like kids, if you don't let them fail, they won't learn. It's
Remember?
a snowplow helicopter parent. You
Yeah.
could have a snowplow helicopter manager, to your point.
Yeah. Really all about balance. And I learned that in our company too. Like we'll correct a problem, but we can overcorrect it a lot. Saying, okay, well now we've gone way too far. So let's try to meet back in the middle. So I think the whole thing's about balance.
Totally. Well, speaking of balance, so you start your company, you have two kids, you understand the value of not working 75 hours because guess what? You no longer have them to work. And so what was your first couple things that you realized you needed to outsource? You mentioned a nanny, you mentioned a cleaning lady. How did that impact your work life harmony?
It helps a lot because I try to outsource wherever I can, as long as it doesn't require too much management to outsource it on my part, right?
Give us examples of that.
So, this is kind of, I don't know if this is a great example, but like you can outsource childcare during the day. That sounds terrible. But the daycare required me to go pick up my kid, bring him home, go back and forth. The nanny becomes, as somebody who was actually helpful, like, putting out laundry, running errands, being part of the overall team. I don't have to run out and back and forth before and after. I bought myself 2 extra hours to work. Is my billable time in 2 extra hours, or when I can get the company to do in 2 extra hours a day, worth it? For me, it is. I don't know if it's, but not everybody looks at their time and the value of money, right? And it's how you use that time. Could I use it to watch TV? That'd be nice. But, it's how you use that time efficiently. So it's always about thinking about your time. So if I'm going to be with my kids, I want to spend the most quality time with them that I possibly can. And if I'm working, I want to be getting the most done that I possibly can in that moment. So I don't want to waste time driving if I don't have to waste time driving. So it's about looking at where in your life you can cut out the fat.
Yeah, it's funny in the chapter that you're featured in, it's the same thing. I kind of talk about do an ROI on your time because to your point, if you're billing out at X rate and your nanny is at a quarter of that rate, it's almost a no-brainer. I chose an in-house and also because I'm a little bit of a control person. I like to know what's going on without necessarily having to jump in and do it, but I feel, there's some level of worth to have the access if you need it or if you want it to your children.
And so if I have a day off, I just go down and hang out with them, or we go somewhere. Or if I get a canceled meeting, we can do something. So there's also using that time. The other thing I'll say is, because you said something, I don't think this is what you meant, but this goes for work and personal life. It's about, I'm going to say this loosely because there's so many caveats, but it's about the outcome, not necessarily how you got there. Now, that doesn't if it's a culture issue at work or, process issue, that's a different story. Like if it's making things broken. But I'll remember when I was pregnant with my son, my first kid, somebody said to me, it was the best advice ever because I'm a control freak. It's like, let your husband dress the baby in whatever he wants to dress them in. If he's going to get them ready in the morning, let him get them ready in the morning. And like, you're not going to like what they're wearing. But is that like, who at daycare or at the park is going to judge the shirt pants combo, right? Like, so Nobody. And maybe other parents, but I'm not there anyway for them to judge me, so it doesn't matter. So some of these little things that I have to learn to let go. And if he wants to dress him, he can dress him. And as long as he's giving him like a reasonably healthy breakfast, and it's different than what I was going to get, you've got to let other people do things their way, because it's really easy, especially for what I see some of my friends who are working mothers. They're so particular about what they need to wear and what they need to eat that the husband's like, well, you just do it then. I'm like, I'm not doing that. You do it. I don't care. As long as they're fed and healthy, not my problems.
You're keeping the child alive. You've done your job.
Exactly. And it's the same thing goes for work. You've got to let people have a win and do it their way. Now, I understand processes and procedures are important, and following, protocols across a company and across divisions is important. But if somebody wants to approach something a little bit differently, you've got to let them. And I have an example of this. We have another team member we were just talking about today. So, this person, we bill on hours, right? And so we look at for profitability, we look at overhead rates, we look at client profitability, we look at all these numbers. And so we have metrics that we go after. This one person is very intelligent, great critical thinker, very strategic. When I process information, I generally do it very quickly. I can process information like in whatever you throw at me, I'll get it in that meeting. I don't need to think about it later. This person will produce a very similar outcome to something that I might, or of the quality that I would expect, but they need literally 8 hours to process that information. But they only needed that 8 hours once. If we have a new client, they need 8 to 12 hours to process this client. I need 2. And so I was talking to them, let's just take the loss on the 8 to 12 hours. If they don't have mistakes along the way, if the client is retained, if we don't have inefficiencies, if I don't have to redo something when I have to review it, or I don't have to review their work at all, let them take the 8 to 12 hours. So it's also about letting people do things their way within, where it makes sense in the company. Because if you try to control too much and you're too rigid, you're not going to actually get anywhere.
I think that's great. Another masterclass. There's a theme that's running through all of this. If you're the smartest person in the room, get a new room. If you have to let people do things their way, personally and professionally. I really liked the example that you're giving because of the husband dressing or feeding the child. It's a great example. It's a fabulous example, because we'll do the same thing at work. Don't worry. And you talk about this in the book. You talk about managers who are like, don't worry, I'll do it. It'll take me 2 minutes. But those 2 minutes, they do 50 times.
But yeah, everyone, especially when you're going from that expert to manager, you think it'll take me an hour to teach them. And then, they're not going to learn the first time, not the second time, not the third. And it's going to take them, 30 minutes to do it. And I could just do it in 2 minutes. So nobody wants to do the upfront investment in order to get the long game, right? And again, thinking it through, we just actually had an employee that started and they lasted for 3 days. And so the mantra, hire slow, fire fast. And so because there's so much, when you hire an employee, it's not just the onboarding for them, it's the training time, it's the managers get pulled away. There's a lot that has to happen to make an employee successful, and you've got to invest in that. But the reason I'm sharing that with you is, I'll have somebody say to me, well, I'm just gonna do it better than them. I could do it faster than them. I could do but then they never get to learn. They never get to be the expert. They never get to grow into themselves. And you'll always be doing that thing for 2 minutes. And I'll give you a great example. I avoided having an assistant for the longest time. I can manage my own calendar. It takes 2 seconds. It takes 2 seconds to go back and forth in an email. When I finally brought on our assistant and she manages my entire calendar for me, she follows up on meetings, I probably saved close to two hours a day that I didn't even realize. And the mind space. If I'm worrying about a project and then this client comes in and he wants to reschedule something, I've got to stop what I'm doing, right? So I've got to switch what I'm doing. I've got to answer them. I've got to pick up the call. I've got to schedule. I could be writing this marketing plan in 2 hours, or I could stop and start 600 times and write it in 5, right? So having the assistant come on immediately saved me time. And I was very against it because I had to teach her how I wanted my calendar done. I had to teach her what the rules were. I had to come up with a process for how to, how much time to leave me in between things. But it's the greatest thing I ever did. Still to this day, that assistant. And so being able to delegate and because she's a smart woman. She can make her own decisions. Hey, Rachel, I don't think this internal meetings is important. We've got to get this client on the call. I'll move this over here. And I see this person. She does all of that for me. I don't have to play calendar roulette. So sometimes you just got to invest in the upfront and empower others to do some of the things so that it's about mental space. So you can let go of all of it. It wasn't just about rescheduling on my calendar. It was about not having to think about my calendar ever again.
That is awesome. You know, if you're talking to young women that are in a corporate environment, a lot of our listeners are coming from, especially technology and technology services companies, where it is a boys' club. I mean, most of the places that you're going to end up working are boys' clubs. We all know this. I certainly worked for a few. What advice do you give women who are coming up through the ranks and really having these conversations in their heads about, am I doing the right thing? Am I advocating for myself? Is my job becoming my life? Like, what would you give them as context or process or things to think about?
I would say that the number one thing that serves me is my sense of self confidence. And I think that I can't just be confident like that. You can't just be confident, right? It takes a while to get there. But I will tell you what's gotten me confident. Two things. And I'm going to circle all this back so it makes sense to your question. But the first thing is I have failed more times than I can count. I have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on mistakes. I have screwed up, messed up, had bad meetings, like, made bad hires, and I've always come out of it, right? And I've always learned from it. So I'm really, that whole learning from your mistakes things. So number one is fail a lot, because you know what? I am not scared of failing at all, because I know that I probably will fail and then I'll figure it out. So everyone's so scared of failing that it creates a confidence issue. And I don't care about failing at all, because I do it a lot and I'm okay with it, right? So you kind of have to fail so many times where you literally don't care anymore. So I would say number one, fail as much as you can, or take the calculated risk. But number two, and this is important, because if you just fail and you don't learn anything, then you're just a failure. But so the second part's really important. After you fail, you have to be introspective. I know people, I've worked with people, I work with people sometimes now who are always the victim. Oh, but this happened. Oh, but they did it. Like, no. In every situation, you had to play or an influence somehow. Even if I walk down the hallway and I trip, I had an influence in that. If my kid comes up here, comes up here and is in the back of this video naked, which could very likely happen, I had an influence in that. Like, there's something that I have done in raising them that makes them think they can keep taking their clothes off and run in front of the camera. They're still very young, so I don't think it's a problem yet, but just saying. So, but my point is that it's kind of like we're all connected. Everything you do, every reaction you have is a reaction. So what's important is figuring out, how did I influence this situation and how am I going to do better next time? And if you can do that, if you can be introspective on yourself, you will come out of every failure and you will gain confidence. And so I was actually saying to somebody today, when I go into meetings, I realized this like a couple of years ago, like it hit me. I'm not intimidated anymore. Like, I just don't get intimidated. I actually get irritated, but I don't get intimidated, because, if the meeting doesn't go well, we'll figure it out. So I think it's about, so to answer your question, coming up in the boys club, it's about confidence. And the only way you're going to get there is by failing and evaluating. But it's also being okay walking away. So I have a good story. Early in my career, I was when you're very new to business and when you're new to your company, you really want to make sure, like, you're trying to close deals, right? You're trying to bring in sales. And so we were trying to build and trying to grow revenue. And I had a sales meeting in New York City with like a business there. So I put my dress on, I put my heels on, I hike into the freaking city, in an hour and a half drive, hour and a half there, an hour and a half back with all the traffic. I walk into this meeting, I sit down, I'm prepared to present this website proposal. It was a very big project for us at the time. And halfway through the proposal, the guy says to me, "Why should I hire you? You're probably just going to have a baby in a few years and stop working anyway." Like, literally those words came out of his mouth. And my response was, if you want me to have your baby, you're going to have to pay me more. And so I didn't get that deal, but he did not hire me. But, also knowing your worth, because if he's going to bring that up in the first place and that's my value, I don't need to work with him. Like, okay, bye. There's other people, there's other opportunities. So I think it's about knowing your worth and standing up for yourself. Now, I'm rambling, but there's a pendulum swing to that, right? So I've also worked with people that have swung that pendulum so far, I know my worth, that they don't bend at all. And I've seen, there's some women I know that will do that, and that's dangerous because that still doesn't, just because you know your worth doesn't mean you're not going to compromise and that you're not going to see things another person's way and that you're not going to negotiate or bend or settle. You still have to do those things, but you have to do it with confidence.
Yeah, that's a really good. So when you talked about introspection, all over the book, I talk about choice and agency, and we have both. But the thing that I tie together, I think, from both what you're saying and how I feel, is that we have to have integrity with our word. It can't be that if things go south, it's not somebody else's fault. We had some micro moment where we had an option to do things differently and opted not to. Now we may not know why we did it and what we learned from it till later, but the point is, it's not somebody else's fault that you didn't get the deal.
Or a deal goes south. I just did a debrief with the team the other day, and we had a client. They're still a client. They wanted a different service, and I wouldn't say they were bullying us, but they've been a client a long time. We want to accommodate them. They're a good client, and they wanted to cut a lot of corners. And in the moment, I don't know why I approved this. We did. And the project came out halfway through late and not the right quality because they wanted to cut those corners. And so we did that. So the debrief was, next time we say no, thank you. Thank you for thinking of us. We can't do this project for you.
That's right.
If you need anything, let me know. And so sometimes the right thing to do is just to say no. Of course, in hindsight, it's a lot easier to decide that.
Yes, of course. But so micro moments, choices, integrity with your word, saying what you mean, meaning what you say, being confident comes from a place of when you're grounded. And it's hard for some women, for some people, a lot of people, we don't come out of the womb necessarily. Well, a friend of mine says that we do come out of the womb either confident or non-confident. That's what she says. Now, whether we believe that or not, but I do think that behavior can be learned. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think experience influences that pretty significantly. And I mean, maybe we do come out of the womb. I mean, if you want to get philosophical about it, maybe we do. I think but I also think that life early on, knocks you down and teaches you to be a little less confident, and as it should. So again, another example, my daughter who's 4, her grandfather and her play like hitting, but they're not hitting, but like they pretend like they're hitting. And so it's a game. I don't love that game. I've told them not to play that game. Grandparents don't listen to their kids. And so there was other people over the house, and she was playing the game with him, and then she was playing the game with other people. And those other people got mad at her, and she found herself in a social situation that she was unhappy with because, but her confidence got hit, but it needed to. So there's also this, like, again, everything's a lesson, and it adjusts your confidence. And when you can realize that all life is a series of lessons, I feel like it's easier to be confident.
Well, I think to your point, experience creates the context for your content. I always say context for your content, but it's sort of like, if I hadn't had the lessons that I had growing up, would I be the same way today? No, absolutely not. Right? If I grew up in a family that was very, very wealthy and everything was handed to me, would I even have drive? I don't know. Right? So it's the rich dad, poor dad, wealth ethic versus the work ethic. Which one do you grow up with?
I also think that there's a couple of it though, because you do need the experience and the life experience to gain confidence because you need lessons learned and you need exposure. So there's definitely that. When you're more senior in a position, you're going to be more comfortable. However, I also think there's a sense of maturity and introspection that accelerates that process or slows it down. So there's people that I know who are, in their 60s who are not self-reflected, and they're never going to be confident because they're not stopping to like look around and realize learn their lessons. And then I know people in their late 20s who are incredibly confident because they're introspective about it. So I really think it's about how we handle the situations that come at us that inspire that confidence.
Good life lessons for those of us. We talk about internal narratives and external narratives and how, the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves and then the stories we tell others really influence how we feel.
Yeah.
Like, what's your story? You know what I mean? Like, what is the person's story? What are they that? Are they the confident person, or are they like the victim? Or do you find that that's helpful when you're hiring people too? Like, getting a sense of how do you know where they're coming from when you're interviewing somebody?
So our interview process, we've got the manager, we've got my COO who looks at everyone because she's really good at attention to detail, which is not my strength. I'm like the visionary, she's the attention to detail. I'll interview, be like, you seem really nice. Let's be friends. You want to work for me? And then I'm like, this is not working out. I don't understand why. We go through those series of interviews depending on the position. So will they fit culturally into the company? Do they have the skill sets? And then do they have the personality? And what I mean by personality is those values. Do they share our values? Do they take accountability? We also do like personality assessments or the Gallup Strength Finder to see how their strengths are going to jive with the strengths of those people on their team. So if I have somebody who's a manager that's very collaborative, I might want somebody who's, a little bit more direct coming to work for them to balance it out.
Sure. Perfect. Wow. So I think we've gotten definitely a masterclass in work-life balance, in failing and introspection, in how to be more confident. And then we have the if you can't let go, you can't grow. I love that. I think that's really good. That's something to think about for women. And also, if you're the smartest person in the room, get another room and or hire people that are smarter than you. Surround yourself with people smarter than you. So these are all great. Thank you so much, Rachel. This has been so great. I really am so happy that you're part of the book. You're part of the journey. You're a poster child for other women that are, trying to do it all. And again, can't do it all at the same time, right?
Yes. You really can't. What's the rule with like wildly important goals? 3 is the max. That's what you can focus on.
That's it. Rule of 3. Love that. Chapter 2. Talk to you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to Possibilities with Monique de Maio, where we unpack life as a female mover and shaker. If you like the show, please consider liking it, or better still, subscribing to it and leaving us a rating. It truly does help. Also, you can pick up my book, The 7 Secrets to Creating a Life You Love, a practical guide for women in leadership. You can find the book, other episodes of this podcast, and how to stay in touch at moniquedemaio.com. DEMAIO. I look forward to seeing you again soon. With gratitude, Monique.